It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Werner and Pamela Loval. We're here in your beautiful apartment in Jerusalem. And Werner, you were born in Bamberg in Germany.
I was born in Bamberg, and I left a month after my bar mitzvah at age 13 with the Kindertransport to England, together with my sister, but without my parents. The British would only let in children, 10,000 children.
And can you tell us a little bit about your family growing up in Bamberg and who your family were?
Well, my paternal grandfather came to Bamberg from Bohemia. The Loval family in Bohemia goes back a long time. We visited the cemetery there, and 18th century and so on, old Jewish congregations. He came to Bamberg just at the end of the 19th century, when electricity started to be installed everywhere. And he saw the potential of electricity and opened an electric wholesale business. So he was the first firm to supply the people in Bamberg and surroundings with lamps and electric instruments, I've got some of his catalogs. And his sons built this up into a big business, including manufacturing. They started manufacturing electrical parts made of bakelite.
Which was new then?
Yeah, so they could be used outdoors. Bakelite was the first kind of plastic, before they had plastic. And when you had lamps outdoors, street lamps and so on, you needed something that wouldn't rust. So bakelite was the answer. And they were among the first to produce bakelite products. They called it hula wit, because my grandfather was called Hugo Loval. They started to produce on a big scale when Hitler came, and eventually they had to sell and get out, like all German Jews. My parents weren't prepared to emigrate, so they had no place to go after the Kristallnacht.
Why don't you talk about your memories of Kristallnacht?
Yes, what do you remember of Kristallnacht? Or what do you remember even before Kristallnacht? Do you remember?
Well, I was going to the gymnasium, the high school in Bamberg, on my bicycle in the morning of November 10th, and I saw in the distance flames, smoke and a fire, and they told me this was the synagogue burning. I still went to the school anyway, gymnasium, and then the head of the gymnasium called me and said, "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but we just got instructions from the government, no more Jewish children in our schools, and I have to send you home." So that was my last day of study in Germany. And on the same day, the Nazis picked up all German males above the age of 18 and sent them to Dachau concentration camp, including my father. He was in Dachau for 3 weeks and came back pretty sick. Anyway, every Jew had to sell their business for whatever they could get and try and get out, because they told them when they released them in Dachau, "This time we let you go. If you come to Dachau again, have no illusions, you won't get out alive. Better get out of the country." That was the warning. And my parents started looking all countries in the world, where could you go? We were registered for immigration to the United States. My mother had many relatives, my father many relatives, but they had an immigration quota of 20,000. In other words, you could only be one of 20,000 Jews to go to the United States any year. They wouldn't let in more. So we had no chance. We would have had to wait at least 5 years, and by that time we'd all be dead. So they had to find a country to go to until they could go on to the States. My mother's brothers were already in the States. My father's brothers were already in England. And they went from consulate to consulate in Germany to try and get a visa. In the end, they found a consul of Ecuador in South America who somehow arranged visas if you got paid for it, if you got money. So my mother got 2 visas from him, for herself and my father, and they were ready to leave Bamberg for Ecuador when the war broke out, or rather when Russia entered the war, because they were booked on a boat from Italy to Ecuador through the Panama Canal. When Italy joined the war and France joined the war, no more boats. The only way to get to Ecuador was by train around the world. There is a train line which was built by the Tsar, the Russian Tsar, at the end of the 19th century.
Trans-Siberian, no?
Pardon?
Trans-Siberian?
Yeah,
To Vladivostok, from Moscow to Vladivostok.
Yeah.
And it's a train that starts in Moscow and ends in Vladivostok, at the other end of Russia, opposite Japan. And you're on the train for 1 week, day and night, and you cross all of Russia until you get to Vladivostok. So that's what they did. There was no other way of getting out. And they sent us a cable from Moscow when they arrived in Moscow. So we knew, we were at school in England, my sister and I. We knew they'd gotten out of Germany. So our first worry was gone. Now we started worrying that they should get safely to their destination in South America, which was the country of Ecuador and its capital, Quito. A country on the equator, famous for bananas and coffee. When they got to, oh, by the way, on the train, they were watched constantly by the Russian secret police. They walked up and down the train to make sure that there were no spies or no attempts to do
Really,
it.
can I ask you, what date did they go on the train? You know, roughly?
1940.
Because there was the whole with Sugihara
Sorry,
and
41. 40 he captured France, 41 he invaded Russia. 41.
That's
1940.
how the whole Sugihara with the visas going to
Yeah.
with
We
the
got out in 1939, they got out in 1941.
and they went on the Trans-Siberian.
And from Vladivostok, that's the port in Siberia, they took a boat to Japan, stayed with friends in Japan for a week until they got a Japanese boat that went from Japan to Panama via Honolulu, Hawaii, San Francisco. They went via San Francisco, but weren't allowed to go down. The Americans wouldn't let them go down.
Like with the St. Louis.
Yeah, they were afraid they might stay there. And we had relatives in San Francisco.
And they wouldn't let them disembark.
Could go down. They could come up to the ship for a short while, but my parents couldn't go down. Then they stopped in Mexico, and then they go to Panama. In Panama, they got off the boat and took another boat from Panama to Ecuador, which was their final destination, and arrived in Ecuador about a week later after Panama. Found a very active small Jewish community in the capital of Ecuador, Quito, well organized Jewish community which cared for its members and for new immigrants, and they helped them find a house and so on. My father became a partner in a factory making raincoats. In Ecuador, like in all these countries, it rains during the winter. November, December, January, February, it rains a lot. And they had no raincoats in these countries, only umbrellas. So my father's factory or partnership were the first to produce raincoats in Ecuador. So that was quite good. And of course now they wanted us to come from England to Ecuador as quickly as possible. My sister and I went to boarding school in England.
Okay, I just want to ask you a little. Who went with you? Was it just your parents that went on the Trans-Siberian, or did they have other family members that went with them?
Family members, no. They were the only family members. But many German Jewish refugees took the Trans-Siberian Railway and saved their lives.
And they went to Shanghai. There were quite a few
also, yes.
that ended up in Shanghai.
Yeah. Shanghai was a very
it was a cosmopolitan. It was
unpleasant destination. The Japanese let you in, but once you're there, they behaved very badly. And the people who were in Shanghai really suffered until the Japanese were beaten.
I'm just going to show you. This is the picture of Bamberg that you have in your book. It looks like a very beautiful city.
Yeah, it's a cathedral city.
What do you remember of your childhood in Bamberg?
Well, it's divided into an old city and new city. The old city goes back to the 11th and 12th century. At one time, the Kaiser of Germany ruled from Bamberg. He had a palace there which still stands. And it was always the seat of an archbishop, very Catholic, all the population. And the relations between the church, the bishop, and the Jewish community were very good until the Nazis came. And I had in my class at the gymnasium several students who were studying for the priesthood. So during peacetime, it was a very pleasant city, very old Jewish community. The Jewish traveler, what's his name, from Toledo.
Oh, that's...
Metrodella Street is named after him.
The Rambam.
What?
The Rambam.
No. He describes the Jewish community of Bamberg in the 11th or 12th century, including some famous rabbis. And they had excavations in Bamberg not long ago where they discovered parts of the Jewish ghetto. And
Benjamin Metrodella.
Yeah, Benjamin.
Yeah.
Benjamin Metrodella.
Yeah. Anyway.
Did you ever suffer anti-Semitism when you were a child in school or elsewhere?
Not directly, no, because the gymnasium where I studied for 3 years was mostly professors and people from Catholic families who were not ardent Nazis. There was one professor of music who was a Nazi and made jokes about the Jews, but on the whole it was a school that had many Jewish students since its foundation. It got a lot of money from the Jewish community and were well behaved.
And did you used to go to shul, to the synagogue often, or?
Pardon?
Do you remember going to the synagogue often?
Sure. I was bar mitzvah in Bamberg after the Kristallnacht, after 10th of November, when the synagogue was already burned down, and they had to take a hall in a restaurant, which became sort of the Jewish center, and install a small synagogue there. And my parents had to get a rabbi from the nearby city of Nuremberg, because the Bamberg rabbi had already emigrated. And I had my bar mitzvah in Nazi Germany.
So I just want to show...
Your father was in the choir, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I don't know if we can just show... This is amazing pictures that you have in your book about... This is the your grandparents. And this is the...
Yeah, right. And this is the grandfather who came from Bohemia to Bamberg and established the electrical wholesale business. This, I think, is the ad for the electrical wholesale business. Yeah.
If we can just hold for a second. It's amazing this is...
These are the products he sold, and they were all brand new because electricity had only just reached the city. So people used candlesticks.
That's incredible. It's... look at the little miniature. It's magnificent. And here's
his catalogue. Yeah.
And this is a picture from 1910. It's and
this was the factory my father and his brothers established. My grandfather established the wholesale business, and they added a factory producing electrical products. And the main product was made of bakelite. Do you know what bakelite is?
Tell them about it.
Yeah,
bakelite is a kind of plastic.
The plastic, so they could have outdoors. And here's an amazing picture of you and your grandfather. And you were 2 years old at this time.
No, not 2. I think must be 4.
No, it says you were age 2 in 1928. Yeah.
19 what?
28.
Yeah,
right, you were 2.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's what Bennett's grandson is now.
These pictures are just unbelievable. And you were your brothers were in the Kaiser's army in 1915. Your father,
1914 to 1918.
The Loval brothers in the Kaiser's army.
They were all in the army. One of them became a German officer. One of them was wounded and lost an eye.
You know, that makes it even more difficult that people felt so patriotic to Germany, and there were many Jews that died.
Nothing can happen to them because
they fought for the country.
The army, they got an Iron Cross there.
The amazing thing is,
look what a beautiful town this is.
It is. It's a World Heritage.
And it goes back to 1798. The
amazing thing is, when Hitler came to power, there was a synagogue.
And this is the one you remember the synagogue?
I remember it well. On Simchat Torah we went around with little flags, and that was burned down completely. It's the inside.
When Kristallnacht happened, I just want to go. It's such a beautiful synagogue. When this happened, when you saw the synagogue, the flames of the synagogue burning, how did you feel thinking?
I tell you, in Bamberg in South Germany, take a look if you can see the certificate from Hitler to my father as a soldier in World War I.
Yeah, I was looking for that the other day.
It's in that. Not so far back.
That's the Schloss.
But Werner, can I just ask? Here you grew up in
Bamberg,
and you there, and you just before your bar mitzvah, and you see the shul being burned and flames going, and I'm sure you must have seen incidents on the street where Jewish shops were targeted.
Well, when I saw the synagogue burning, and when I got to the gymnasium, the school, they told me, my fellow students, that it was burning. The head of the gymnasium called me 2 hours later and told me the news that they can't have Jewish students anymore, and I had to go.
How did you feel? It must have been I
felt terrible, but I felt more terrible when I got home, because my mother told me that my father had been picked up by the Gestapo and taken to the Bamberg jail to be sent to concentration camp Dachau. Should I look up?
And can I just ask, when your father returned, it must have been a very emotional seeing thank God that your father came back.
It was, but he came back in bad physical shape. They suffered in the Dachau concentration camp First of all, from the cold. Dachau is near the Alps and probably one of the longest winters in Germany. And the Nazis intentionally wanted them to suffer in the cold, let them stand outdoors, frosty weather for hours and stuff like that. So my mother did all she could to pack and get out. My father was being treated by doctors to get well, and about 6 months later they got out.
And this is a picture of your grandmother who didn't get out.
Yeah.
Oh, your grandmother didn't get out?
Yeah.
She was sent to Theresienstadt.
At the age of 80.
At the age of 80?
Together with whatever Jews were left in Bamberg.
And in Theresienstadt, did she...
She lived there until they killed her.
Oy.
She still wrote a few messages. In those days you
could get postcards.
Messages, no mail. And they stopped one day. I found it.
And Werner, can I just ask, your sister Erika, how old was she?
She was 1.5 years older than I. And she went to girls' school in Bamberg. Girls' school which was run by nuns, Catholic nuns, and also very friendly to the Jews. Some of them were persecuted by the Nazis too, but the same school had many, I can't call it celebrations, but assemblies after the war to tell their students about what Nazism was and how they fared and so on.
Which lovely pictures of Werner and his sister.
This is really lovely. This is in age 3 with Erika.
That was put here, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was just the two of you?
Yeah.
This is really, really nice.
There are two of us who joined a group that was organized by the Kindertransport. You know about the Kindertransport?
Sure, but Werner, I just want to ask you before, when you were told that you can't return to school, did any of your non-Jewish schoolmates come and help you, or did they?
Yeah, 2 or 3 who lived in my neighborhood and who, were playmates and so on.
And did you remain friends? Did you keep the friendship? Could they still come and visit you? Did you?
They could, but they didn't, because they all belonged to the Hitler Youth, with uniforms and swastikas and so on. And the two things didn't go together. You can't be in the Hitler Youth and be friendly with the Jew. No, but the most interesting student was a boy called
Max
von Lerchenfeld, who belonged to an old family of landed gentry, you would call it.
Nobility, I would say.
Yeah, nobility, with a castle and houses in Bamberg. And we were very friendly, and he was not a Nazi. He was a good German, but not a Nazi. And he sort of kept, if any of the other boys said anything about Jews, he usually kept them away or so. After the war, I sent him a note from the States and asked him if there's anything I can send him, because they had a food shortage in Germany after the war. So you know what he answered? Sent me some ping pong balls.
Really?
I couldn't get them.
They had a big estate where they grew all the vegetables you can imagine, so it didn't need vegetables. And same with milk and eggs and so on. What he needed were ping pong balls.
Yeah. They were a wonderful family. We stayed in touch with them after.
And they were related to Colonel Stauffenberg, who tried to kill Hitler
Klaus.
on the Russian front. Do you know about the plot?
Yeah.
I've just found what you wanted to talk about.
Certificate.
This is the certificate awarding the
Do you know German?
From Yiddish, I can understand a little bit.
I will translate.
So, if you could
No,
even...
I will translate it. It's the certificate awarding the Ehrenkreuz medal to my father, and now in quotes, in the name of the Führer, Adolf Hitler. And here it is.
This was 1933.
This is incredible. And do you have the original?
Amazing.
I don't know where it is. We had it.
You should have it somewhere.
Yeah.
Look, you looked really like a real German family with the German...
the lederhosen.
And you had the leather...
Lederhosen.
Sure.
Brought up as Germany and Bavarians. My father and I were dressed up in the local lederschön,
In the
Lederhosen.
leather pants, and Bavarian
In the
hats.
study, I have the picture of the whole family.
Wow.
In Bavarian.
You have yeah, it's here.
This
You
is
have
it.
it
It's a
on the
beautiful
poster,
picture.
Yeah, this is the Bavarian dress that they wore for the women and the men. The men wore leather pants and the
Women
women
wore
But they-
dirndls.
dirndls, right?
Yeah. When Werner had the book launch in Bamberg of this book, the local bookshop made a big poster with this picture on it.
picture,
At the
Yes.
university they had it.
And at the
Hamburg
university, that's
Yeah.
right, yes.
Now this is the biggest joke. When Hitler came to power, they still had a president of Germany by the name of Hindenburg.
Yeah.
And Hindenburg was an old German general from Prussia who was admired, like Eisenhower rather, and became president in name only. The real leader in 1933 was Hitler. So because of Hindenburg, Hitler agreed to give confirmation certificates to all Germans who fought in World War I, including Jews. And this is the certificate my father got, which says in the name of the Chancellor, which was Hitler. No? And there were 33. 6 years later, they put him in Dachau concentration camp.
It's just unbelievable.
Isn't it?
Did your parents, could they ever have imagined that such a thing could have happened?
I had an uncle who we always quoted and laughed, who when they talked about emigration before Hitler, or the early years of Hitler, always said, if I leave Germany, I will leave on the last car, on the last train, to show his patriotism. He had the Iron Cross, which was a very rare army distinction,
prestigious.
World War I, right? And he was a captain in the German army. The other brother of my father lost an eye and was seriously wounded but recovered. There was one brother.
But he didn't get out, the one who
No,
said,
the
Which-
Robert and Fred got out.
No, the one, who was the one who said...
There was one who left Bamberg for Katowice in Poland and opened a steel business in Katowice, Poland. He came to Bamberg always to visit us once a year, twice a year, and sort of was happy that he was out of Germany. When the Germans came to Poland, they took him. He escaped for a while, but they caught him and put him in a death camp and killed him. So,
Werner, I just want to ask you, how did your parents get to know about that there was a Kindertransport?
about what?
How did they get to know that there was a possibility of sending you and your sister Erika to England on the Kindertransport?
The Kindertransport was widely publicized, also in German Jewish publications and in the Jewish community. Any Jewish child up to the age of 16, I think it was, could join the Kindertransport. The British limited the number, I think, was it 30,000?
No, eventually it was 10,000.
10,000.
But you had to provide guarantees.
10,000 Jewish children could come in, provided they had some English family that would guarantee for them. Either the child could stay with them or they would pay for the school and so on. And that's how my sister and I got out. not knowing if we would see our parents again.
So I want to ask you, because it's so, it's actually, if one looks back, the thought that the parents are going to send their children to a foreign country, not knowing if they're ever going to see them again, it must be one of the hardest decisions any parent could ever take.
It's hard to imagine.
In my book,
and many didn't see.
In my book, there is a prayer.
Wonderful prayer. I have to find
which we found in my mother's German prayer book, which is about that subject. You know, asking God to protect the children. So.
There were some cases of parents who took the children off the train at the last minute.
That's true. And
no, we were lucky because they knew we were in good hands. As soon as we landed in London.
But I want to ask a little bit before, when the decision was made that you and your sister would go on the Kindertransport, do you remember the day that you left?
I left a month after my bar mitzvah. My bar mitzvah was on May 13th, 1939, and I left, 39, and I left in June 1939.
What happened on the day that you left?
Pardon?
What happened on that day? Do you remember your parents taking you to the train station? What do you remember?
Yeah, we had to go to the train station in a nearby town because Bamberg had no direct connections. We had to be in Bremen, the port where the boat would take us to England. So we went to a town called Würzburg, which is about 2 hours from Bamberg.
You went with your parents?
Yeah, my sister and my parents. And they said goodbye.
Okay, and when you said goodbye, was it very difficult for you and your sister to say goodbye to your parents?
We all hoped to see each other again soon. At that time, there was still hope that they might come to the United States because of their name on the waiting list. You know? The possibility of Ecuador came later. Anyway, in England, we were well received by relatives and friends. And
I just want to ask you, before you went, when you got to the port, do you remember going onto the boat? And do you remember being with other children?
Yeah, I've got a picture of the boat in here.
Oh. If one can have a look at the picture of the boat, there would be.
Yeah.
Were there many other children on the boat?
Yeah, sure. It was a group, the Kindertransport.
Here's a description by Erica. Erica's kept a diary, which has been published too. And here's the description of when you left Bamberg. Shall I read something?
Could you read? Oh, that would be wonderful.
I can give you a copy of the book. I've got enough.
Wow. Tell me if you could read a little.
I only remember, this is Erica, that it was on a Monday in mid-June. A telephone call from
1939.
A telephone call from Munich informed us about everything. Werner and I had the good fortune to go by boat, the Europa. The entire trip over water was divine. And then we had to say goodbye first to our beloved Bamberg, then to Würzburg, to Mummy and Daddy, and finally in Bremen to Germany. I had to tear myself away from everything I knew, everything I was accustomed to, and everything that surrounded me as a child, and I didn't know for how long, maybe forever. Many wild thoughts crossed my mind during the sea voyage. Many a tear made the farewell difficult, but there were so many of us all together which made things pleasant and cozy. Then she goes on and describes it in great detail.
Wow.
Can you find the prayer for
I'm looking, that's what I'm looking for.
If I could just have a picture of the boat.
Pardon?
Yeah.
This is very special. This is.
It's a wonderful thing that Werner wrote this book. He spent a long time doing it.
It's a beautiful luxury book.
And Pamela, if I could ask you, read so beautifully. Is it possible? This is the book called Memories That Won't Go Away, a tribute to the children in the Kindertransport.
Yes.
And it's got an entry about you and your sister Erica.
Yeah, sure.
If you could just also, it's not long, but it would be wonderful.
Okay, fine. This is this is the excerpt from Werner's book.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you could just read a little bit.
Fine. In mid-June 1939, Erica and I left our family's home at 27 Luitpoldstrasse in Bamberg, Germany, for the last time. Erika and I drove with our parents to Würzburg, where we said goodbye. Then Erika Sarah Loval, aged 15, and Werner Israel Loval, aged 13, carrying travel documents stamped with a large red J, joined the Kindertransport and boarded the train for Bremen and the SS Europa on our way out of Nazi Germany.
1 second. The big J, every Jew had in his passport a big red J, so everybody would know it's Jewish. In addition to which, you had to add the name Israel to your name. And women had to add the name Sarah.
Sarah, yeah. Do you want me to go on?
Please, it's...
Vera Simonis, who worked...
That was a distant relative who worked at one of the rescue committees in London, and she found the English lady who guaranteed our stay in England and paid for everything.
Yeah, that's what you write about here. You say Vera Simonis, who worked for one of the Jewish refugee committees set up to rescue German Jewish children, succeeded in finding a guarantor for Erika and me. Miss Ailsie Lazarus, a single lady from an aristocratic Jewish banking family in London,
Sephardic,
to whom, of course, we were perfect strangers. Miss Lazarus took upon herself the entire financial responsibility for both of us, including school fees and related expenses, the cost of vacations, and later even paid for our journey from England to Ecuador. And then he goes on to write...
She belonged to the Sephardic community in London. Her family came to England after being expelled from Spain, and very wealthy. I remember when she asked us, how do we get to school? So we said, we'll take a train. She said, no, I'll give you my car. And we went in a beautiful Rolls Royce.
Chauffeur driven.
Yeah, chauffeur driven.
If you could just continue,
Okay.
it's
On August the
unbelievable.
1st, 1940, at the 11th hour, our parents finally escaped from Germany, and on October the 16th, 1942, our family was reunited at last.
In Ecuador.
And Erika says, now it still seems like a dream for me to sit here with Daddy in the same house, and suddenly all the travel has come to an end. It is almost too much all at once. Everything seems like years ago, and when I think about it, the tears almost come to my eyes. But then there is the anticipation of Quito and Mummy and everything that awaits us there.
Quito is the capital of Ecuador.
Ah, and here, years later, after our dear mother's death, we found the following insert among the pages of her prayer book. It's called Prayer of a Mother Separated from Her Children.
That, if you like, will photostat for you.
Well, he can photograph
No,
it.
because that's worth reprinting.
I might cry.
If you could read it,
Okay.
I mean, this is
I'll
so
try
special.
not to cry.
It's-
My children live in a distant land, far from their parents' home, far from their father's heart and their mother's care. And I, whose greatest joy should be to watch over their health, to protect every one of their steps, to embrace them with never-ending love and devotion. I am far from them. I can't read it without crying, I'm sorry. I'm far from them. My eyes do not reach them, nor does my hand. And there is nothing I can do other than pray to you, my Lord, for their well-being and safety. Oh, hear my heart's fervent plea. Take my children under your almighty wings. With your merciful hand, lead them over every stone and thorn in their path. Endow them with gifts of grace and kindness, together with wise and modest behavior with which they may win people's hearts, and which may bring them kindness and goodwill in those hearts, so that cold, faraway lands may become as familiar to them as home and hearth. Sustain them healthy and fit in body and spirit. Shelter them from evil and wrongdoing, from harm and injury. Protect them from temptation, and help them resist both temptations from without as well as the turmoil of inner passions, so that these may never gain a hold over them, that their souls may remain pure and sincere, and they may hold fast in childlike innocence and piety to all that is noble and divine, that their eyes and faces may always be a reflection of their pure hearts. Grant them, O Heavenly Father, strength and reason, perseverance, and the will to understand their challenges, tasks, and obligations, and to fulfill them with joy and love, so that they may benefit from these and be blessed and be led to the summits of life and happiness. Help them overcome all obstacles and privations, and grant them everything that can serve as a foundation for their present and future well-being. Hear, O Father, my fervent, heartfelt prayer, and may the time not be distant when you will return my children to me, full of life's vitality and happiness, to be my heart's pride and joy with the blessings of mankind, and the grace of God my Lord. Amen. Isn't that something?
And your mother wrote this?
No.
We don't know where it comes
she found
from.
it.
And we don't know where it comes from, but
It is the most heartwarming,
isn't it?
incredible message.
She put it in her prayer book, and when we went through the books, we found it in her prayer book.
It encapsulates everything. It encapsulates.
Yes.
This is an English translation of the German, original German.
But you know, all her wishes for you came out true.
Pardon?
All her wishes came true.
All the wishes came true. The prayer came true, was fulfilled.
Wow.
Well,
And there's a beautiful picture of you and Erica, your sister. I think we have it's so wonderful that inside here.
Which one?
I think
I've got both books now.
this is very, very special. This is your family in 1936 in Bamberg with your parents, and here's just a lovely picture of you and your sister. And Werner, can I ask, you going on the Kindertransport with your sister, it must have made it a little easier knowing that you weren't by yourself.
It did. She was a year and a half older and sort of protected me.
And when you came to England,
At the school, we were at a boarding school, was the same thing. My sister and I were at the same boarding school. And the boarding school was German boarding school from somewhere in central Germany, which, when Hitler came to power, moved to England. The headmistress, the story is
Anna
that,
Essinger, her name.
yeah, near Ulm in Germany. On January 30th, 1933, was Hitler's birthday, and all schools were ordered to fly the swastika to celebrate. She refused, and as a result, she was told to, close the school. She was given some punishment, and she said she decided, a country like that, you can't educate children, and took the whole school with teachers and children to England.
You have here in your book, you quote what she wrote at the time.
Read it.
She said, "It appeared to me that Germany was no longer a place to raise children in an atmosphere of justice and freedom, and I decided then and there to find another country for our school."
that's amazing.
They formed a committee, the Jewish community in London, which would help transfer the school with various distinguished people like Bentwich and people like that.
And Werner, can I just ask, when you came to England, had you known any English before, or you had to learn
what?
English.
Did you know any English before you came?
Very little. My parents made sure that I would learn English, but that was only a few months before emigration, because until then, until November 1938, I had to learn Latin at
And
high
Greek.
school and Greek.
Very useful.
My sister spoke better English.
And when you came, what happened when you arrived in England? Do you remember?
Yeah, well,
Who met you when you came off the train, of the boat?
yeah, this Vera Simonis, our distant relative who found the guarantor, was there to receive us and took us to her apartment.
And was this in London?
In London, yeah. She worked at a committee to rescue Jews from Germany. Woburn House, what was it called?
Woburn House, yes. Woburn House.
Yeah. Set up specially by English Jews to rescue Jews from Germany. And she found this lady from the Sephardic Jewish banking family who originally came and said she would like to guarantee for a man from Germany. She was single. And our relative Vera talked into guaranteeing for 2 children instead.
She was single.
She was a single, she was never married.
She was never married.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. But very generous, you know. She insisted on paying for everything. Easter vacation, we said, we can spend it at school and so on. No, you go on vacation, I pay for it.
And was she very loving towards you and your sister?
George?
Was she very loving to you and your sister? Was she?
She didn't want the personal responsibility. That she left with our relative who worked at the committee. She took over all the financial and legal responsibilities. Whatever the expenses were, including the trip from England to Ecuador to our parents,
Which must
she
have been
paid
very
for.
considerable.
She paid for everything. And when I arrived, it was in June 1939. She insisted that we have a summer vacation. So I went to a boys' camp in Guernsey. Do you know the Channel Islands?
She was part of the Channel Islands, sure.
And my sister went to an English family in Wales. So we had a good beginning.
Did you stay with her in her apartment?
Pardon?
Did you stay with her in her?
No, we stayed with our relative, the one who found her.
She did a major.
She invited us for tea at a beautiful mansion, and she wanted us to go in her car to school from London to Kent, and she gave us her Rolls Royce with a driver to drive us from London to school.
And when you got to school and you met now English children.
No, the school was established by this German Jewish
So was it
lady.
mainly German children in the school?
Yeah. 90%. German children similar to our fate, whose parents couldn't take them with them or couldn't get out. And many of the children there never saw their parents again. We were among the lucky ones.
This was a picture of Miss Lazarus, the one. Yeah. And the lower one, I think, is a picture taken many years later. But
Very similar down.
Apparently her father was famous in the circles of bankers in London in his time.
It's incredible. And what I found also remarkable.
the other one is Vera
Yeah,
on the
Vera.
right. She's the family
distant relative who
found her.
They found her.
In the photo below.
That you had the communication when your parents got to Moscow, that they sent you a.
My mother made sure when the war broke out, there was no postal communication between England and Germany. So my mother made sure that a relative in Switzerland would forward her letters to us and our letters to her. And that went on all during the war. So we were always in touch with them.
It must have been so important having this link and this,
Sure.
because you know what was happening
Yeah.
with your parents.
No, my mother wrote at the rate of approximately a letter every 10 days or so, 2 weeks or so. So we knew how they were, where they were, and they knew where and how we were. Most of the letters from us were written by my sister. I was too young and too naughty. She is a very good writer.
She used to nag you, didn't she,
Yeah,
Erica?
yeah.
And where did you still have the letters?
In the diary, sure, in the book.
But the original letters?
The original letters we also have somewhere. Yeah.
It's very, very, very valuable, very, very precious.
Yeah, yeah.
I could find them if they're in the file there. Shall I have a look?
With all of Erica's things. You've got Erica's diary here, can you open it?
Yeah, what I read before was from the Erica's diary.
And
yeah, what do you want?
Werner, can I just ask, did you become very close with the other Kindertransport children?
Well, in school, we all became close. Those who were in my class, those who were in my sister's class, were all more or less in the same position. You see? They had to leave their children, their parents, and they had to learn English, and they were worried about their parents, where they were and would they get out. All more or less the same position. There were a few English-born boys and girls, but very few. I would say 75 to 80% were refugee children from Germany.
But you did stay in touch with a few of them, didn't you?
Yeah.
But there were quite a few of the Kindertransport that went not to Jewish families, they went to non-Jewish families.
Some of them had very bad experiences.
Yeah, some had terrible experiences where
do you know
they were
Henry
mistreated.
Foner?
I went to see Henry. Yeah,
his story is
he
amazing.
donated his to Yad
postcards,
Vashem, and Henry's a very special.
Yeah.
Yeah, his son couldn't read or write, he was too little, so he sent him
Henry couldn't.
yeah.
Yeah.
So he sent him picture postcards.
Yeah.
And Henry actually, in the beginning, this is what he mentioned to me, that he was very upset that his parents had sent him because it was hard for him to understand. Only when he's had his own son did he really appreciate what his parents had done for him.
Yeah.
No, my sister and I were old enough to understand that you have to get out of Germany. After my father's experience in Dachau, and we were waiting for the news, that they got a visa for somewhere, and were able to get out. They sent us a cable from Moscow, and they got out to Russia.
And can I just ask, and it's a difficult question, a lot of people have said, why did the Jewish community in England not take in more of the Jewish children?
The English community was ready, the government wasn't. The business with the 10,000 children...
It was a quota.
Yeah, but it happened like this. There was a boat with refugees from Germany in Palestine, or trying to get to Palestine. And the British, like they did with all boats, like Murray Greenfield told you, wouldn't let them in.
The white paper.
Yeah. So the world was furious, everyone was furious that they wouldn't let people in. And Chamberlain had to do something to compensate. So he decided that not grown-ups, but children, 10,000 German Jewish children can come to England without their parents. That was his way of saying he did something, And most of the 10,000 children stayed with strangers whom they never met, and not Jewish. Most of them are not Jewish.
Into the arms of strangers. That's
And
the name of
they say about a third actually lost their Jewishness. And there were many stories that they didn't even know about, they weren't told about their parents, and they were lost.
A cousin of mine, who became a manufacturer himself in England, made a study after the war and found that Jewish manufacturers and retailers and merchants employed more British employees in 1938, 39, 40, when there was a lot of unemployment, than far more than 10,000. In other words, we wouldn't have taken away anybody's employment. There was a shortage of workers. but the British didn't want us.
Did you ever meet with or hear about Rabbi Schoenfeld? Rabbi Solomon Schoenfeld?
Who?
Rabbi Schoenfeld.
Schoenfeld.
I heard about him,
Yeah,
didn't
but
we?
didn't.
But he wasn't associated with the school, or
No.
No.
because he helped many also
Yeah,
come.
yeah. One of the patrons of the school was Norman Bentwich. Do you know the name?
I've heard the name. Sure.
Yeah. And a few people with that background from the
And
Jewish community.
in the school, did they have any like religious services? Or
Yeah. For those who wanted, they had Friday evening services and on the Chagim. And we had a subject called Jewish history, which also taught Bible. And I would say 80% of the students were Jewish, and of those 80% were German-speaking, Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia. So to acclimatize was easy because they were all in the same boat.
You said 80% were Jews? Who were the rest?
We had a few British Goyim who lived in that area.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Mostly from Kent. We lived there. A few from London.
And it would be wrong of me not to ask here, but just on a joking side, did you play cricket or soccer when you were there?
So
Tennis.
some people did, I didn't.
And learning English, did it come easily?
Pardon?
To learn English and to become part of the system? Learning English, did it?
Well, first of all, I took English lessons before leaving Bamberg. And then, of course, we had English lessons as part of the curriculum, because most of the children had to improve their English.
And he has a gift for languages. Erica, who was a year and a half older, lived in New York for many, many years. She still had a German accent in her English. Werner doesn't have a German
doesn't.
accent.
But she wrote very good English.
Oh yes, her knowledge of English was excellent.
And then Werner, let me ask, when you finally hear that your parents are in Ecuador and they want you to come,
Pardon?
when you and Erica, when your parents now can send for you to come and reunite, do you remember leaving London and going to reunite with your parents, your journey?
But it was adventure, because they sent, as soon as they got to Ecuador, they sent visas, immigration visas, to my sister and me, to our relative in England, the one who took care of our things. And she called Miss Lazarus, and Miss Lazarus agreed to pay for the trip from England to Ecuador, so that was settled. And then she had to find a way to get us there. This was at the height of the submarine war. And everybody who heard about our planned trip said, "You're crazy." They were sinking British ships at the rate of, I don't know,
There were U-boats, there were submarines, there was...
But my parents wanted us very much, and it turned out to be good because my father died after we arrived. And we went in a convoy. I think it was 30 ships guarded by British warships all through the North Atlantic. We had one submarine attack on the convoy, nothing happened to our boat. And until we reached, Dakar in Africa?
It's gone.
Yeah. Approximately near Dakar, the British warships left us and our boat went on its own to Buenos Aires, because South Atlantic was safe. But the first part was pretty risky.
And it was you and your sister. Were there any other people on the boat that
Yeah,
you
we
knew?
were a group of children in a similar position, altogether 12. All had relatives or parents in Latin America. And we all went to Buenos Aires. And from Buenos Aires, we went on to Quito, Ecuador. Others went on to Rio and other places.
And who came to welcome you when you got to Buenos Aires?
Well, my parents had arranged all along to have friends welcome us and look after us. When we arrived in Buenos Aires, there was a whole group of friends from Bamberg who welcomed us, who had emigrated to Argentina, and they wanted us to come and eat and dine, and the Argentinians wouldn't let us off the boat. They said, you have a transit visa, you can transit Argentina, but you can't stay in Argentina, not one day. So when the sailors on the boat heard that, they said, if I want to, I take one of their uniforms and go ashore with them. They went ashore every evening to drink and so on. So I saw Buenos Aires at night with the British sailors.
That's wonderful. That's really lovely. And but how old were you? You were still quite young at this time. How old were you?
16?
16.
And you put on the uniform?
Erica was 18.
But you put on the uniform and you went...
As sailors, you know, yeah. Yeah, they went to beer joints where they could get
It's a naughty boy.
And from there, how did you get to Ecuador?
Well, in Buenos Aires, first of all, these friends of ours, all of them, wanted us to stay with them, eat with them and so on. Most of them we couldn't meet except at the staircase to the boat in the port. But on the last day, of course, we had to get the train from Buenos Aires to Chile. Chile is a port called Valparaiso. Have you heard of it? Santiago is the capital. Valparaiso is the port on the Pacific. We took a train all through Argentina, from Buenos Aires to Mendoza and the Andes Mountains.
And this was you and your sister?
Yeah.
Was there anybody else, or just...
No, that trip, the two of us made alone. But it was
if you think about it, a 16-year-old and your sister was 18 years old.
Yeah, it was a comfortable...
We look at our grandchildren sometimes and we think what Werner went through
so
when he was
courageous.
their age.
It was a comfortable trip because the train was good, and when we climbed up the Andes Mountains, we reached snow-covered peaks, you know, and went down again on the Pacific side to Chile. Good trains and well cared for, you know. You could eat on the train and drink on the train. And beautiful view all along. Now in Chile, we had to take another boat from a port called Valparaiso, from there to Ecuador. What is it?
Sorry, I thought you went on by train.
By train to Chile.
Yeah, and from Chile
in Chile we took a boat on the Pacific. And my parents had arranged that the time between our arrival by train and the departure of the boat, somebody from Bamberg who had emigrated to Chile and who was their friend and a very well-to-do businessman in Chile too, we were his guests. He received us and we stayed in his villa and so that was no hardship. And the boat trip was also very nice, from Valparaiso to Ecuador. And in Ecuador, our father met us at the port.
And when you met your parents, they met you at the port as soon as the boat came in?
Pardon?
When you got to Ecuador,
yeah,
they met you at the port?
My father, yeah. Quito, where we lived, is up in the mountains. And Ecuador in those days had no quick train from the capital, Quito, to the port. It was a zigzag train that had to do the mountain. You know?
And your mother, she didn't come?
She stayed behind and received us when we reached her house.
So, Werner,
you can open the page to the house in Ecuador.
Werner, if I can ask, how was the encounter when you saw your father?
Very sentimental.
I know you've been separated now for
1939 to 42.
3 years.
3 years.
3 years, yeah.
And had your father changed a lot in these 3 years?
Well, he was in much better health because when we left, he still suffered from the consequences of the concentration camp. And in the meantime, he became a partner in a factory in Ecuador manufacturing raincoats. So that was quite good because it rains a lot in Ecuador.
And you must have been extremely emotional when you and your sister met.
It was. My sister describes that very well, much better than I.
Yeah, there's some pictures in the garden, but here, this is the Villa Erika, they called it in Quito.
It's the house my parents took.
Erica and with your mother, and you had a dog, Bobby.
Yeah, the dog.
Wow, and your sister opened her own English-speaking kindergarten.
Right. She did very well.
In the house.
She did very well. My father passed away after a few years, unfortunately, but she made enough money to support the family and to pay for our trip to the States later on.
Can I just ask, before, you just because it's so fascinating, when you saw your mother now, you come to the home and can you describe a little bit of the encounter with your mother when you and your sister saw your mother after
3
being
years.
separated for these 3 difficult years?
You can imagine the embraces and kisses. No, it was very, Erica describes it very well.
But you remember.
We're going to lend you a copy of this.
But you remember that encounter very well. with your
Sure.
mother.
First was my father in the port, and then was my mother.
Now, I'll tell you why I asked. There have been cases where when the children were separated and when they reunited, it was so difficult to rebond with the parents. There have been, unfortunately.
Well, we were in touch with them all the time.
Yeah.
During the war, we used the address of relatives and friends in Switzerland to forward mail from them and from us, and that way we were in touch all the time.
And how long did you?
I'm sorry, I wanted to add, I don't know whether you realise it, but Werner is by nature an optimist. He's very positive about
I think
everything.
the whole family.
And I think that gave him a lot of strength and helped him carry through all the obstacles in life and all the changes. And
Well, we were very lucky too.
no, I'm talking about you. It's nothing to do with luck. It's to do with character.
But I think it's also your parents, your whole family. That they had the insight. And
His mother was apparently. I never met them, but she saved their lives. She was the one who ran from one consulate to another until she managed to get the
because
visa.
it's very rare that a consulate would give. I mean, this is.
No, the Latin American consulate.
They were easily bribed.
For money they'd give you anything. And the Ecuadorian consul also took money. But, I didn't care as long as they got out.
Wow. And how long did you stay in Ecuador?
3 years.
Tell him about your first job there.
1942 to 45.
Tell him about your first
My
job.
first job. There was a group of Jews from Italy who emigrated to Ecuador and opened a pharmaceutical factory. The name of the company was LIFE, L-I-F-E, Life. And they heard about my coming, and they were good Jews. So they said, if you want to work for us, you've got a job. So my first job was in their laboratory to take the barks of trees and squeeze out the quinine. You know, the medicine against malaria has a lot of quinine. And Ecuador was one of the few suppliers of quinine. So they made a fortune. So I broke so many test tubes on the first day in the lab.
That was the end of his job.
So I got a job with another job in Immigrant, where there were no test tubes to break. And then I got a job, a nice job, with the American Embassy. They had a military mission there, training the Ecuadorian army with high officers. and they needed somebody to do the English correspondence. Gave me a very nice job. I was picked up by jeep every morning and taken home by jeep. And the colonel who was in charge of the military mission said to me, we went on from Ecuador to the States after 3 years. He said, if they draft you into the American Army, tell me and I'll ask for your assignment here in Ecuador, where they lived like kings, you know. They got paid in dollars and all the prices were very cheap. And that helped me afterwards. I entered the American Army, had to enter the Army, and at the end of basic training, most of the company I belonged to was sent to Korea. And I had orders to proceed to Panama and Ecuador with the idea of getting this job at the American Embassy. So it kept me out of Korea, and it kept me in Panama for about, must have been 6 or 9 months, during which the general there at the headquarters said to me, first he said, you can do whatever you like, choose a job and I'll give it to you. But in the meantime, he says, you become correspondent for the American Army paper, which was called Stars and Stripes. Every army unit during World War II had this newspaper. And the first assignment I had, they sent me to a baseball game, the American Army group against the Panamanian group. I had no idea about baseball. Never played baseball, never watched baseball, but I made it.
Well, how did you make it?
I sat down next to the referee,
The coach?
the coach, and asked him what to write. He told me.
Sure. Wow.
Yeah.
And can I ask, when you went to America, was it easy adapting in America?
Was what did
When you got to America, was it easy, your adaptation coming to America?
Yeah.
You had
Don't
family
forget,
there?
we were in New York when we arrived in America, and in New York.
Was this after the war? After the...
Well, after the European War, the Japanese War was still on. But in New York, first of all, my mother had 2 brothers there, and their families, children and so on. And then we had a lot of people we knew from Bamberg, who had emigrated, and a lot of people we knew from Quito, Ecuador, who had emigrated. So we had lots of company and things to do in New York. I started working in an export-import company, which was set up by somebody who had worked for my father in Bamberg, and then emigrated to the States.
And which part of New York?
We lived first in Washington Heights.
That was the Jewish area, the German Jewish
German
area.
Jews, exactly. And then we moved to Long Island, Queens, Forest Hills.
Elmhurst.
My mother had a brother who lived there in Forest Hills.
But in Washington Heights, that was very German. It was
Very German, very German. We went to a synagogue which was practically 90% German.
There was Samson Raphael Hirsch. His community was...
Pardon?
Samson Raphael Hirsch. A lot of his community were in Washington Heights.
Who?
Samson Raphael Hirsch. Raphael Hirsch.
Raphael Hirsch.
And then also Yeshiva University was in Yeshiva University, the main Yeshiva University.
I went to evening school. I worked during the day and went to evening school university. First Columbia, because we were living in that area in New York.
How did you go to university having missed so much of your schooling?
Well, with the GI Bill, wasn't there some...
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
sure. All ex-soldiers were accepted with pleasure.
Yeah.
And what did you study at college?
Journalism. Became correspondent for Time magazine. When we were in Ecuador, I became correspondent for Time magazine. So I went on with studies in journalism.
Well, you studied economics at some time too.
Yeah, also.
And did you work for Time for many years?
No, Time was what they call a string
Stringer.
correspondent. In other words, part-time correspondent. I sent them something whenever something happened. And in those countries, there's always something happening, usually a revolution or something. And whatever I sent them, most of the things they used. Sometimes they put it together with other reports. And worked very well because they paid in dollars, and in Ecuador, the dollars were very valuable. When I got to New York, I met with them, and I saw that's not what I want, because I would have had to start at the bottom, work my way up with a low salary. In New York, they had thousands of people. So I went into the
I think we'll have to have a continuation.
I just want to ask the last, because it's just a very long. Werner, when the war ended, when you first started hearing about what happened back in Germany and the atrocities and what's happened with your grandmother, did it become available, the news? Or how did you get to know what had happened in Germany?
Yeah, most of that news we got after the war. I mean, we knew that she had been sent to a camp called Theresienstadt, which was for elderly people. The Germans showed off to foreign visitors and diplomats how well they treat
They brought the Red Cross.
Yeah. And after 2 or 3 years in this camp for the elderly, they took and shot them all.
Wow. And have you ever been back to Germany?
Many times.
Was it difficult to go back?
Not really. When I went to Germany, I planned my visit so that I would meet friends, and on every visit I met more, including, for example, our mates at home who worked for us, and people who worked for my father.
Your classmates organised a reunion.
And classmates? You were non-Jewish
Yes.
classmates?
Until now.
And how was it when you met your classmates?
Well, the ones I met were not the Nazis, including
A
this.
lot of the others had got killed in the war too.
Yeah, including
This
this.
is incredible. What
This fellow whose uncle had tried to kill Hitler.
His name was Max Lerchenfeld.
Yeah, and what was the name of the officer who tried
Klaus.
No.
Yes.
What last
Klaus.
name?
Who had it?
It's in here.
No, I have it here too. But
This,
Pamela, you went with?
Stauffenberg.
Stauffenberg.
You went with for these reunions?
Pardon?
Not the first one or two.
No.
That was before he got married. After he came to Israel, we started taking our children and then later our grandchildren. They've all been to Bamberg. We took the grandchildren in pairs, not brothers and sisters, but cousins, 2 at a time, and it worked very well. But I must tell you, the first time that I went to Germany with Werner, we drove from Austria. I lived in London during the Blitz, and for me the association, the fact hearing German and being on German soil, I had a physical reaction. Then I said to myself, look, he's the one. I mean, we had a Volkswagen. I couldn't understand why he bought a Volkswagen car. If Werner can do it, then and I can too. And then I met all his friends and wonderful people with whom we really developed very, very close ties, very close friendships. I mean, you have to tell it one time with a story about the Castells. You haven't mentioned them at all.
Yeah. This schoolmate of mine was related to, what's his name, who killed Hitler?
Stauffenberg.
Every one of these families have their own castles for the last hundreds of years in the country outside Bamberg. And one of his relatives, brother-in-law, was the Duke of Castell. And the Castells are a family that own huge sections of land and forest
And vineyards.
In areas about 2-3 hours from Bamberg. Anyway, he introduced me to his brother-in-law, Castell. We became great friends with Castell. And they all came over to Israel to visit.
Not only that, they came to help celebrate. She came after she was widowed. She came for our 60th wedding anniversary. With
wow, you really developed.
And we went to Bamberg for his 90th birthday celebration.
Not to Bamberg, to his castle.
To his castle, yes.
He put on a 90th birthday party.
The whole village celebrated.
Which could only be put on by a king or a prince.
First the service, wonderful people, they really
first
were.
The service in the church, and then the whole village marched from the church to the castle. And in the castle there was a big luncheon in the garden, you know. And I wasn't the only Jew. He had the head of the Jewish community and so on. Very friendly to Jews.
It's wonderful to hear this.
Yeah.
This is family.
So we've been back often, and we still have one or two connections in Bamberg, and Werner corresponds with his friends there.
And Werner, if I can ask you, what message, and Pamela, you as well, what message do you give to your grandchildren and to the future generations?
I told them the story. They saw for themselves, and I told them the story.
But a message that you went through, having what you learned from your parents, what message do you impart to future generations?
Well, first of all, that the Jews need a country of their own, that you can't rely on any country. I mean, my ancestors on my father's side had lived in Austro-Hungary, Czechoslovakia. On my mother's side, they lived in southern Germany. We can go back as far as Mendelssohn in the 18th century. And the village, they were called Aufhauser. And the village where they lived was Aufhausen. And we visited Aufhausen. And there was a Jewish cemetery there. There was a Jewish synagogue there. And you learn history. You show the children, or teach the children. The Aufhausen, for example, the reigning prince or duke who owned all the land had a librarian whose full-time job was to deal with his library. And we went to her, and she helped a lot with all the documentation and dates and so on.
I'd like to read to you Werner's epilogue in his book,
please.
That conveys.
Give him something to drink.
No, it's all good. Pamela, if you could go ahead. But
have a glass of wine.
I've had. Don't worry. It's
in a minute. This is the epilogue. We owe to the Jews, wrote Winston Churchill in 1920, a system of ethics which is incomparably the most precious possession of mankind, worth in fact the fruits of all wisdom and learning put together. In the preface to this book, I wrote about an era of Jewish creativity in pre-Nazi Germany, comparable to the golden age of the Jews in Spain. In both cases, a fruitful symbiosis ended in complete ruin. My generation witnessed the most dramatic years in Jewish history since the destruction of the Temple. Those of us who survived thank God that He saved us from the Nazi barbarians, and that we were privileged to witness the birth of a Jewish state after 2,000 years of dispersion. History shows again and again that the Jews are irrepressible. Today, in 2010, as I conclude this personal history, I find great satisfaction in the fact that despite the indescribable disaster of the Holocaust, we are beginning to see a new golden age of Jewish achievement, buttressed by an impregnable state of Israel, which is proving more reliable than our vain trust in Western civilization. Since World War II, between 1951 and 2000, Jews won 32% of the Nobel Prizes for medicine, 32% for physics, 39% for economics, and 29% for science. This despite the death of so many of our greatest intellects in the gas chambers. The Jewish state has become one of the world's foremost entrepreneurial centers. Israel has more high-tech startups per capita than any other nation on earth. It leads the world in civilian research spending per capita and ranks second only behind the United States in the number of companies listed on the Nasdaq. Israel, with a population of 7 million, now it's nearly 9 million, attracts as much venture capital as France and Germany combined. Israel has weathered the recent global recession, and the government did not have to bail out any of its banks, unlike most Western countries. According to many analysts, Israel is the strongest recovery story in Europe and the Middle East. Although we are surrounded by hostile states, 650 times the size of Israel in territory and 60 times Israel's population, Israel has survived the first 62 years of its regained independence stronger than ever. I am convinced that our own sovereign state is the best guarantee for the future of our grandchildren, their children, and the Jewish people everywhere. Theodor Herzl was indeed a modern prophet when he coined his famous motto, "If you will it, it is no dream."
Wow. Well, I just want to thank you both. So to Pamela, thank you so much for reading this most beautiful. It's really, really amazing. And when we look at your book that's been published in German, and you see all the different posts, all the cancellations of the different destinations that you went, your life and your journey, Werner, is just something remarkable, beyond words.
When I was 21 years old, I'd been to 21 countries.
But I want to thank you both so much.
Oh, pleasure.
It's been the greatest honor and privilege to listen to your lives, and thank you very much.
Your initiative is wonderful. And
it's the greatest honor, and you should just have mazel bracha and nachas from your children and grandchildren.
Great-grandchildren.
And grandchildren.
Five great-grandchildren we have.
So, may they stream in good health and many more anniversaries. And
thank you. Do you understand that you have a film? You made a film?
Sure, this is wonderful.
This is all being taped.
This is really lovely.
It's all been taped. So
Werner, really thank you so much, and Pamela, thank you both of you.
There was no housing for Western immigrants, and many of them, especially American, went back because they couldn't find housing. So I formed a cooperative, and we got land from the Keren Kayemet near the monastery and the museum, and built Did you know the architect Resnick?
I've heard, sure.
David Resnick? He was our architect.
And you founded Anglo-Saxon.
Mm-hmm.
So it must give you such satisfaction seeing Anglo-Saxon in every city, in every town.
Yeah.
And it's helped many, our family included, many families.
Mm-hmm. And I'm lucky that my son Benny continues. He's very good too.
And Werner, you seeing Israel change through the last years. It's transformed.
When did you come here?
In 94.
94.
So I've been here for 26 years. And when did you come to Israel?
1950. 1951. Actually, I was sent here by Mr. Hut. I worked for the government in Washington after they set up the embassy, and I was in the economic department.
Of the Israeli government? Wow.
And all my friends were people like Teddy Kollek, Chaim Herzog.
Wow.
And they all said, come to Israel, come to Israel.
So it was an old lady sitting there, and she made this. I think the arms are breaking off. It's not.
It's so beautiful. Sure.
It's taken from a photograph.
So Werner was the Honorary Consul General of Guatemala in Israel.
Yeah, what happened? He used to be in the foreign ministry, and we spent 3 years in Guatemala and opened the first embassy of Israel in Guatemala. And later on, they appointed him as the Honorary Consul of Guatemala in Jerusalem. And when the President of Guatemala visited here a couple of times, he presented Werner with the highest order of the Quetzal, the highest order of Guatemala. This is the certificate. Here's a picture of Werner with the President and the Foreign Minister of Guatemala. That's the King David Hotel. Yeah. And there we are.
And he's the flag of Guatemala. Yeah?
I think they need dusting.
It's absolutely incredible. In 2016.
Yeah.
Pamela, thank you so very much.
He hasn't worn it once. But it's
really
very nice to have the acknowledgement and
magnificent.
appreciation. He's still in touch with them, though.